Good, thank you for coming.
All right, so we're going to start the meeting at 6 o'clock. It's a meeting of the Public Safety Committee. I'm the chair, Dan Bresnan. To my right is Terry Murphy, and to my second right is Gladys LeBron Martinez. Also in the audience is Counselor David Bartley. Because at the last minute there have been a few people that were unable to make it, we're just going to clean up the agenda real quick, table a couple items, and then we'll get into the meat of the meeting, so to speak. So I would entertain a motion to table item 2 and 3.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, and the same would be true for 7, 8, and 9. And I'll read these after, well, let me read the first two.
Okay.
Item 2 is ordered by David Bartley. The Holyoke Police Department set up traffic enforcement on Laurel Street near the Willow Street Y to monitor speeding and review and revving engines. Holyoke Police Department set up speed and traffic enforcement as well as enforce the no parking ordinance on South Street near the Elmwood Towers. Please send the reports to Public Safety for hearing. The chief was going to make it and then emailed me just recently and said he was unable to attend. Item 3 is also by Counselor Barty. The Holyoke Police Department set up traffic enforcement at McIntosh, Sherwood, Wedgwood, Russell Terrace, and South Street area between Northampton Street and Chapin Street for a few periods over the next month. Speeding is an ongoing concern. So the motion is we table that. All in favor?
Aye.
I would also entertain a motion to table 7, 8, and 9.
Make a motion, we table 7, 8, and 9 for Anderson Burgos.
Yes, Anderson Burgos called me and let me know that he was feeling under the weather, so he would not be able to attend and asked me that I table these orders. Item 7 from Anderson Burgos, a study be done at the corner of Portland Street and Mackenzie Street to see if suggestions could be made to improve safety. Item 8 is a constituent that resides at 156 Nonotuck Street, have been dealing with flooding issues for many years. And they asked that a storm drain be placed at the end of the street to try to help that matter out. And item 9 is ordered that the sidewalks on the even side of Beacon Street be repaired.
Could I just ask?
Of course.
Just, Mike, are you aware of the 156 Nonotuck? We are aware, okay. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's already been resolved, or it's in the process of being resolved? Okay. Okay.
Can we, as far as the sidewalks are concerned, can we just send that your way and you probably mentioned it in this, but rather than table that one, is there, I mean, I know there's a sidewalk list, so to speak.
Yes, we've added it to the list for potentially getting done.
You guys want to come in? Come on.
Good evening. Relative to item number 9, we have reached out to community development. We've confirmed that Beacon Street is eligible for community development block grant funding based on income limitations and things like that. So what we've done at this point is we have a list already, part of the 2018 contract, but we're optimistic that we'll have additional funding available to do some additional sidewalks beyond that. So we have put Beacon on that list. I can't commit today that we'll have the available funding to do it this year, but it is on that list of where to go next if the funding allows. And it is eligible for CDBG money.
Can I just ask one more comment? Sure. Just, as of right now, the recommendation from the Community Development Advisory Council was that there wasn't any money for sidewalks, if I'm not mistaken. So is there money left over from last year? Or I know you requested quite a bit.
Right.
And I'm almost positive they put 0. Am I correct?
Sure.
I think I'm correct, right?
Right.
Yep.
Because we're dealing with federal fiscal years,
Yep.
we're working with 2018 dollars right now.
Okay.
And we have a contract that's been executed with a contractor to do work on the 2018 contract this spring.
Green, okay.
And we're optimistic that there'll be some funds available through the sidewalk money potentially, and maybe some reprogram money that might be able to be put towards sidewalks, particularly if we're not going to receive any sidewalk money next year. We'll try to get as much done this year as we can.
Okay, thank you.
So out of respect for Juan, I'm still going to table it, and then we can certainly, revisit that. So on the motion to table, all in favor?
All right.
Aye.
All right, thank you. I'd like to take item 5 out of order as well, if I could get a motion on
Make
that.
a motion, we take item 5 up?
Second that?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Item 5 is an order filed by Council Bartley as well, that the chain link fence at William J. Shepherd Sheared Playground be removed unless there is some rationale reason for keeping it in place. If it cannot be removed, then please explain why, and at least replace it with something more attractive and that doesn't become a magnet for plastic bags and litter.
Motion, we take it off the table?
Yes, all in favor?
Aye.
Mike, if you want to touch upon that, or
Sure. So back in 2016, the city made a request to DOT to remove this fence. The fence belongs to them. It demarcates the boundary of their property. It was installed when 391 was constructed. We made the request, and DOT at the time said no, that it needs to be left in place for safety reasons, and they decided to protect families and children that are using the park from going out into Resnick Boulevard. So at that point, we kind of stopped pursuing it. There is some desire in the city to remove it for the reasons that Councilor Bartley mentioned, that it is an eyesore, collects leaves and litter, and in my opinion, it doesn't really serve a safety barrier from the sidewalk, because you have the sidewalk and then there's a row of trees before you get to Resnick. And where the sidewalk kind of abuts Resnick, there is no fence at Sheared Park. So we've made another request to DOT to have it removed, and we're waiting to hear back from them. But it is something that we would like to remove it, because it collects leaves and litter, it's unsightly, and DOT doesn't maintain it, the city winds up maintaining it. Be best to remove it.
have you heard back from the
I have-
DOT?
Not yet, no.
Counselor?
Well, at least there's some good news on that front. So, one, I have no reason to doubt you, Mike, ever. So if you said you contacted them, although I had not heard that, I hadn't seen any written communication relative to this. But I'm positive that what you said is accurate. You weren't here in 2016, so you must have received some sort of written communication somewhere that they were contacted. Now that I know this, and now the public knows this, I will certainly feel free to reach out to Mr. Massey, myself, and whoever the acting District 2 Commissioner is, Peter something, I can't think of his name. I will reach out to myself as well as our state delegation. But hypothetically, what would happen if we just took the fence out?
Yeah, I'm not really sure.
I'm going to guess
They
nothing. I'm going to guess nothing would happen. But as you know, and we've seen it ourselves. Mothers with strollers walking in the roadbed. In fact, I just talked about it Monday night. And that hasn't seemed to click yet with anybody. Mothers walking in the roadbed from High Street to go up to South Street Shopping Plaza. Mothers with strollers walking in the roadbed because there's no sidewalk, which I've asked repeatedly for 5, 6, 7 years now, to have CDBG funds for a sidewalk to go up High to South across the 391 interchange. So we can't get that done, and we have no CDBG funds for sidewalks this year, none. Well, but I'll keep asking. But now we have Mass DOT claiming for a safety reason, and since when are they concerned about Holyoke pedestrian safety and Holyoke pedestrian activities in a park? Because if that were the case, I don't know why they don't put up a huge fence along Crozier Field or anywhere else where there's a state highway abuts it. But at least there's some progress. I'm ecstatic to know there's a dialogue, and whatever communication comes from Mass DOT relative to your last inquiry, I would hope that you could forward that to the committee, and then I'm sure the committee will forward it along to the various city councilors so we can see what's happening. But I do thank you for your effort.
And to your point, where there are sidewalks on High and Maple Street at the 391, you know, intersection, there aren't fences there.
Right.
There's only this one stretch of fence along Resnick Boulevard.
Yeah, that's got to be a made-up story. It's like, don't bother us, we got more important things to do, like spending $8 million for about a 150-foot bridge over a canal. You know, we got way more important that'll take a year and a half to erect and cause traffic disruption for 18 months. We got way more important things to do at Mass DOT than worry about a little chain link fence. But, you know, I know we're sensitive to people's right to ask motorists for proceeds, but that's the first thing they see in Holyoke when they come off 391. I know counselors are sensitive to that, and I respect all counselors' opinions, but that's the first thing they see. May I have money when I get to the top of 391? The second thing they see is a huge chain link fence going along what I think is a lovely park, now that I've walked through there numerous times as a city councilor. Never walked there before I got on the board here, but it's a lovely park, and it's from what I can tell, in the nice months, it's used by residents at Jackson Parkway. So, you know, why have this eyesore of a fence, and why take away a person's right to walk on a sidewalk and make them walk on a roadbed? So, anyhow, those are my thoughts.
So should we table it until we get some correspondence from DOT and you find out?
Yeah, we should table it, and then I know you, if we don't hear, when do we, I'll just through the chair, when can we expect a reply? I mean, the chair indicated that he's gonna have another public safety meeting in 2 weeks. You know, maybe it's premature to think we can hear from them in 2 weeks, but.
Well, Rich Massey is usually pretty good about responding and communicating. So it could possibly be within 2 weeks.
Yeah, and if the answer is no, I mean, this is,
Then our question would be, why not? And, you know, I would push DOT on this.
oh, that's great, Mike. Yeah, and what are you gonna do about it if we pull? I mean, is that expensive to take though? I mean, are they, I haven't like grabbed a fence, but it seems like it's slightly flimsy.
The posts are concrete and embedded. So it's not really flimsy, but if we did remove it and DOT said that's our fence, you have to put it back, then the cost would be in putting it back.
Fence, you have to put it back. Well, it's our city, so you figure it out, but that'd be my response to Mass DOT. So, sorry, it's our street, it's our park. In fact, and by the way, that interchange where 391 is, Rich Massey has sent, because we went over this numerous times, and in fact, in person in Northampton, he showed that that's City of Holyoke property where the aforementioned sidewalks that I know I got off topic there with the sidewalks heading up south to from High, but that's City of Holyoke property. So I'm just wondering why he's concerned about demarking a borderline on a city-owned park.
Yeah.
I just, I'd have to, yeah, I've, you know, he's a pretty reasonable guy, so I'm hopeful he'll, but I guess my question mark is, if the chair put this on the agenda for 2 weeks, is that reasonable?
I think so, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Can I just make one other, and I don't know if you would agree with this, but if we can't get the chain link fence down, and they say we have to have a fence there for safety, could they make a more attractive fence? That wouldn't be so magnetic?
Well, that was the other part of my
litter?
order. That was the other part of the order. If you can't take it down, why can't you put up something somewhat attractive and allow for pedestrians to use the sidewalk? I mean, I'm mystified by it, but, you know, maybe that would be the
part of the conversation.
the ultimate resolution, Mike. But, yeah, that would, I mean, I'd rather not have it, but if there's,
Yeah.
I mean, if it truly, I mean, I don't see kids playing there with like a I mean, I see families hanging out
You're right.
when I go there. Now, sometimes I see some other more nefarious characters hanging out there, but it's not, that's not I don't think that's a magnet for troublemakers. That park is, I think, is really for the Jackson Parkway families. So,
Can I Terry, have you ever had any problems that you've heard of at that park? Okay.
Terry, you gotta
Yeah,
go on the
yeah.
mic if you're gonna talk. You could keep-
You
Oh,
can
yes,
come
sir.
right here, Terry. Or you can share.
You can't leave. How you doing?
I know that the fence isn't very attractive, but it does somewhat control some of the foot traffic. There was, when Roberts Field first got renovated, there was an accident closer to Roberts, but somebody was coming from, well, there were a few accidents. This wasn't a big one, but it was just kids running to school or across the street to get to the high school. So it just stops kids from just darting out into the road. So I would rather see a more attractive fence. Maybe not even the whole length, but it does serve some purpose.
Okay, so why don't we have a fence at every other park? Why not put one in Springdale?
Traffic?
What?
It's
On Main
traffic.
Street?
No, but that's why we don't need a fence at every single park, but there is a lot of foot
Well,
traffic.
Main Street has a lot of traffic.
There's not a school right across the street where there's a lot of young kids. Foot traffic. It's just my opinion.
All right. I respect you very much, you know that.
Thank you, David.
Thank you,
So I'll make a motion, we table this until 2 weeks.
thank you.
All in favor?
All right,
Motion to take item 11 off the table.
okay, make a motion, okay.
Oh, yeah, this is good news.
All right,
Item 11 is also from Council Bartley. Order that the DPW superintendent and city engineer look at making the top of Hitchcock Street where it merges with Westfield Road safer. This would include possibly limiting parking on the south side of Hitchcock Street and eliminating or moving the PVTA bus stop, as well as trimming or ordering the removal of hedges at 97 Hitchcock Street to allow for better visibility. Gentlemen?
So we discussed this a number of months ago, I think Councilor Bartley and myself at a committee meeting. Councilor Bartley had made some attempts to get in touch with the property owner. I followed up with some additional attempts. Fortunately, working together, we were able to actually make some contact with the property owner. And although our focus was originally trimming the bushes, the property owner actually allowed us to get onto their property and remove the bushes altogether, which we did. And it definitely has improved the line of sight at that intersection. You know, there are still some challenges there that would involve moving a retaining wall and some other things that are more problematic and much more difficult to remove, but it definitely has improved the situation.
Counselor?
Yeah, and I agree, and so we're grateful for that. It's a major improvement. It's still a dangerous intersection, but it's made much less dangerous by that work. And then just on the other part of the order, relative to that, there's no PVTA buses that drive up there. So there is a PVTA stop at the top of Hitchcock Street. I would just like to see it cannot be in the, well, I know that you're doing a review of the ordinances relative to PVTA bus stops. I'm going to suggest that one is not in the ordinance book, and that should be subject to removal.
And that, just for the other councilors' benefits, I've actually reached out in response to some previous council orders and have a discussion going with the PVTA to compare the council ordinance list of bus stops with where the bus stops currently are and try to reconcile that list. And we've already had some discussions of there may be some opportunities to consolidate some of those locations with some public information, you know, so bus stations don't go away immediately, but where there might be bus stations that are spaced too close and they could be consolidated into a single. So we're still continuing with that, and I expect that we'll come to the full council at some point with some recommendations relative to updating and consolidating that list of bus stops throughout the city.
Yeah, just if I may, through the chair, that is just vitally important, that we want PVTA in Holyoke, but to have 9 stops on High Street from 391 to City Hall, is that overkill? On the other side of the coin, we heard here in the committee that I chair, that we could possibly be losing some great interns from Mount Holyoke College who want to do work with Homework House, because there's no longer appropriate buses coming from South Hadley to Holyoke, where a few years ago there were. So now they don't have transportation. I mean, yeah, Mount Holyoke does a lot for the city, more than we could ever have dreamed before we heard from the professor who was here a month and a half ago. I mean, what Mount Holyoke does for this city goes unheralded, and it's incredible the amount but they want to do more. And they want to have interns that specifically would be paid by the college for doing work at Homework House and, other nonprofits. But they need transportation, that's the big thing, and housing was another problem, but transportation is a huge one. And, but as we said, PVTA, what they'll do is they'll literally just put up signs. They'll just go ahead and have their crew put it up without a city ordinance. And that's what Mr. Perrin is referring to, and I think the one that's in the order, that was one that was just thrown up. And the other thing, if I may, just through the chair to the city engineer, if you get the chance to look at that intersection at the top of Hitchcock and Westfield Road, when you're traveling from Schermerhorn's and you make the right-hand turn onto Hitchcock, it's, I don't know if that's the safest turn in the world, especially when there's a lot of parking right up there. So that's why I wanted to remove the bus stop and is the parking situation safe enough so when cars make a turn, is that the best setup? I don't want to take away parking spots, but is there the right kind of sight lines and turn lanes available? So that wasn't necessarily spelled out in the order, but I think you can generally say, if I may, to the chair, this has been complied with, I would say. So, and I thank the engineer and the superintendent for their work on this.
Make a motion that the order has been complied with?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care, Dave.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Number 10,
Yep.
that's the only other one that's not.
Yeah, you can, want to take item 10?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, motion is to take out of order item 10, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Item 10 is followed by Councilor Murphy, order that the superintendent of the DPW, the city engineer, and someone from the police department meet with the Public Safety Committee of the City Council to discuss the continuing problem of excessive speeding on Main Street from Springdale to the traffic light on Route 5. One of those goals would be to set up speed humps, if possible, on the street before Dean Crosswalk on both sides of the street. Another would be to have more frequent radar enforcement at random times. In addition, please consider posting electronic signage letting drivers know their speed as compared with the limit.
Could I also invite Dr. Zreik in here? Because we're talking about safety around Dean driving wise, so if you can come on in as well. If I can, Mr. Chair. So, I mean, again, I live in the area. I walk by Dean frequently. I drive by Dean frequently. And all the way from Vernon Street at the light at Springdale to the Route 5 light is really become a speedway. And it's not, every now and then, it's pretty consistent. I mean, I know when I'm slowing to go into my driveway and I'm coming from the north end going south, if there's a car behind me and I'm down to 25 or 30 miles an hour, I'm always concerned that I'm gonna get hit. I know at Dean, and now we've got middle school students at Dean as well. So there's a few things, and I think both sides of Dean would be the logical place if we can do something to provide both a physical incentive for drivers to slow down, but also the other thing I wonder about, and I know we've talked about this for Metcalf the other day in committee, was the school zone traffic lights. If that could be put in there, maybe that would slow some people down. It's also, unfortunately, a problem with tractor-trailer trucks that think 50 or 60 miles an hour in a residential area. Now, we don't have a lot of kids on my immediate section of Main Street, but if you go farther down towards Route 5 or towards Springdale, you've got a lot of kids. And obviously at Dean now you've got kids. And it's an accident that's been waiting to happen. It's someone getting hit and killed that's been waiting to happen. And, I brought this up when I wasn't a counselor many years ago. And, this was when we just had speed bumps and not speed humps. I also met with the chief of police who talked about maybe doing some radar, which we've done, but it doesn't stop the problem. It stops it for a week and then that's it. But he suggested also the potential of putting some kind of groove that would slow people down. And again, he talked about the kind of grooves you have as a warning when you're on the highway and you're out of lane and you got that little groove coming across. He was talking about it going the other way so that people would realize, hey, I don't want to be driving my car 60 miles an hour and all of a sudden it grooves and hit another groove. So my hope is that we can be allowed to create some kind of physical incentive for people to stop, both on the south end of Dean and on the north end of Dean. And I think if we did that, we would significantly slow the traffic in both neighborhoods, the Springdale neighborhood and the Ingleside area, and obviously we would slow traffic by Dean and hopefully make it a much safer situation. So that's my hope. And I think, and I know it's a busy street, and if the state highway people tell us it's too busy a street to do that, then, my argument to them is if you got people that are potentially getting hit and it's an area where you've got parks, you got schools, and you got residential neighborhoods, it's just not an area for people to be going 60 miles an hour. Sure. And I know when they've done radar, they've gotten 50 and 60s. And I know there's been drag racing. They used to have drag racing pretty much from the car wash around 11 or 12 o'clock. And luckily, I got to the point, I got to the age, I don't hear that well anymore. So, but I know they're there. And so these are, it's a major safety issue. I don't think it would take a fantastic amount of money to help resolve it, or at least to dramatically improve it. And so, that's why I've asked you to come down, and I wanted to make sure you were involved in this as well, because,
Okay. I'll start off, and Mike will jump in as he sees fit. Just a couple of things I didn't write down here, but in response to your commenting about driving 25 or 30 miles per hour, just as a sort of a matter of record, the legal speed limit on Main Street from Route 5 to 9.97 miles heading eastbound is 35 miles per hour. And that's what governs, because it's actually passed by city ordinance. The 25 mile per hour speed limit doesn't govern that location. Mm-hmm. Then from 0.97 miles beyond, heading further east, it drops to 30 miles per hour.
right.
If the council saw fit, they could remove those posted speeds from the city ordinance. And at that point, then the legal speed, enforceable speed, would drop to the 25 mile per hour speed limit. So again, is that going to cause people to drive slower? No, but it will drop the posted speed. Speed control is tough, and I certainly speed control in localized areas is a lot easier. When I first looked at this, I approached this, it's a 9,000 foot long corridor that you referenced, and trying to get drivers to drive the speed limit over that entire corridor is very challenging, because then I excerpted a quote out of the Mass DOT design manual that basically says people drive the speed that they feel comfortable driving in the conditions that are present. So if you have a straight road, you have a wide open road, they drive fast. If you have a narrow road, you have a curvy, windy road, they drive slower. The only way to mitigate that, in referencing DOT design guide, is really continuous heavy enforcement, because people will, as soon as you remove that enforcement, people will revert back to what they feel comfortable driving. That said, there are things you can do in localized areas, and I think if we were talking about Springdale and talking about Dean, the flashing beacons, rapid flashing beacons, things like that are very appropriate, and they will improve safety at those locations. They're likely not going to slow people down on the entire corridor. To do that and do it in a long-term method means you really need to do something with the shape and feel of the roadway, which if we are reconstructing the entire roadways, there are things you can do with putting, you know, landscape median in or a landscape buffer between a bike lane and the driving lanes to give the road a feel that it should be driven at a slower speed than people currently drive. There's a trade-off because sometimes it takes away from roadway capacity as well, which you kind of want both. You want as much capacity as you can get, but you also want people driving as slow as possible. So long-term improvements along the entire corridor probably would require something that causes people to physically slow down along that corridor. That said, either specific locations such as again in front of Dean, in front of Springdale, some of the measures you talked about would be much more appropriate. Some of the measures you mentioned in your order, such as the flashing radar signs, they can be pretty effective when they're teamed up with enforcement, because what they do is they give a sense that there is enforcement, even though there isn't enforcement on a continuous basis. It helps to kind of bridge the gap. And if the police department is able to have a presence there periodically, drivers then don't know, is it just the speed sign that I can ignore, or might there be a police officer waiting to catch me somewhere down the roadway? So they're relatively affordable, and if teamed up with some manpower from an enforcement standpoint, will bring the speed limit, the driving speed down. It likely won't bring everybody down to the speed limit. It won't stop the drag racing. But it will bring sort of the average speed on that roadway down, most likely. To bring it down completely and do it long-term, again, you're talking about changing that road relatively dramatically. That, you know, isn't in the cards at the moment. But, you know, if we're looking at putting flashing signs, doing other types of things to improve pedestrian safety right in front of the two locations, and I think that's very, very achievable.
To build on what Bob was saying about the speed limits, the current 35-mile-per-hour speed limit and the 30-mile-per-hour speed limits, those are regulatory speed limits. The 25-mile-per-hour citywide speed limit that we have is a statutory speed limit, and there is a difference in the enforcement of those two. Regulatory speed limits can be checked with an instantaneous speed measurement, and if the vehicle is traveling faster than the regulatory speed limit at any point in time, then it can be considered a violation and can be enforced. Statutory speed limits, the vehicle has to exceed that speed limit over a certain distance, and the distance varies based on the surrounding environment. So downtown area, it would be exceeding that speed limit for, I think it's like 850 feet, something around that, where you have to confirm the vehicle was exceeding the speed limit for that length. So it's a different enforcement mechanism. So right now, you could have a police officer with a radar gun popping people all day long. Whereas if you were to change the speed limit down to 25 miles per hour with that regulatory speed limit, it makes enforcement a little bit more difficult. Not that it can't be enforced, it's just a little bit more difficult. And then for the rumble strips, if you will, putting those across the street, I've read where devices like that have been used in other locations, but I think in a residential area, it would create noise. So every time a vehicle travels over that strip.
But the only, my thought on, and that's why, and I did think of that,
Yeah.
but that's why I know it'll make a little bit of noise at Dean, but they're pretty much, the buildings are closed in, right? There's no windows open at Dean, you have. Right,
Central area there, yeah. I wouldn't think for Dean it would be an impact.
yeah. And Dean's far enough away from the residential parts. That's why I thought that the challenges for drivers for going speed, being near Dean, is basically about a halfway point between the Vernon Street light and the Route 5 light. And am I gonna stop them for the next 900 or 9.9
9,000 feet.
miles?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, maybe not, but they gotta start over again. And at least, you know, I know, I would say the worst people are the people coming from Route 5 and getting on the Main Street, and I'm assuming they're going to 391 or something. But they're flying. And then I would say the other, you know, they're not driving too slow on the other side either, but that's why I'm looking at Dean is for the rumble strips, if that was possible, just to make people aware, hey, we gotta slow down here. We don't wanna be doing this too fast. And, you know, I don't know anywhere else that it would work. That's the only place I thought it has a chance of working. And plus the fact that it's a school zone, I thought maybe that provides some leverage in terms of the state saying, hey, that's fine, you can do that kind of thing, because you're talking about a school zone area with 700 kids right now.
Oh, not that many. I mean,
Gonna
but the concern is, yeah, we're growing the number of kids there, so you're gonna have more students there. I defer to the experts on, you know, the best way to slow people down, but I share the concern about, as the number of kids grow there, you know, plus younger students being there, I'd be very concerned about cars speeding through by Dean. But I defer to the experts on what the best way to slow them down. I don't know if it's the flashing lights or the strips, but I think something is in order for that.
Do we have, go ahead, Gladys.
Yeah, so my question in regards to your idea about having these, whatever they're called again.
Rumble strips?
Yeah, they have them on the highway, I know what they are, but, so what happens like in the winter, like when, you know, my only concern about this is about having more potholes, if these things are there, when they're coming through with the plows, what happens? What ends up happening? Does it damages?
It
To be a
could.
problem, or what would have happened? What do you think?
It could damage the road more in the wintertime.
And you're removing a little bit of the road surface, so you're making
Yeah,
the
because you
pavement
do,
depth a
right.
little bit thinner at that location, which probably the ideal time to do this, something like this, would be when you're putting a new surface down, and you could
Right.
thicken the surface to compensate for the fact that you're gonna remove a little bit of, but if you take an old worn surface and put rumble strips on there,
Right.
it could accelerate the breakdown quite a bit, I would think.
Is there any place here in the city that we have that?
No.
Will be the first time?
There are in some parking lots and things like that, at the Pride Station, for instance, driving out, there's some rumble strips, and it catches people's attention. It wouldn't be one strip, unfortunately, because one strip, by the time somebody hits it and
Right,
gets over it,
right.
it's too late. It would have to be a series to give advance warning.
Yeah, and my theory was that you'd have, you know, on both sides of Dean, whichever way you're going and whichever side of the road you're on, you're gonna get a double. You're gonna hit it before, maybe 100 yards before and 100 yards after. So you're recognizing that there's something there to slow down as you're going into Dean for sure. And hopefully, as people, and most of these are people that drive that road frequently, and most of them aren't residents. But if we can do that, you know, you do that a few times, after a while, you're thinking, all right, I'm not gonna be going 60 miles an hour here. And hopefully, you know, maybe they're going 40 or 45, but, you know, if we can slow them down by 15 miles an hour, that's gotta make it a lot safer.
I know that people say that a lot of times signs are not much of help because people ignore it, but to me, the individuals that really go through those streets are the same people who live in the same, you know what I mean, crossing through or crossing over. It's not like new people, because a person who's traveling to Holyoke will probably come through the highway, will not come through Route 5, right? My thing is, I have not seen that this is brought up. I have not observed or seen what type of signs do we have, children, school, you know,
There's
school
children
nearby
crossing.
or something, or children's crossing, or children's at play, anything like that. Is there any?
Yeah, there are signs
Quite a
like that
few.
at Dean, but it doesn't impact, at least it doesn't appear to impact those drivers.
Yeah, you're right, there is some signage, but
There
not.
aren't lights, there's just
It-
yellow
I
signs.
have heard, though, the flashing lights have worked. For example, by Lawrence, it's helped a lot.
Yeah.
You know, the bigger signage with the lights flashing, you know, but, so I do think if there's a way to do that, Metcalf is obviously a priority because we have a lot of younger kids there. And I know that's being discussed, and I think you're coming out to the school
On Friday, yes.
this week. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, that signage doesn't seem to work by Dean. And I just worry because we are gonna, like I said, we're just gonna have younger, you know, we're gonna have younger students, more students than we currently have. You know, 3 years ago, we had, you know, 150 kids there. We hope to have close to 500, you know, over the next few years.
So,
We did skip over speed humps, I know you'd mentioned that, I'll just, based on some counts that we'd done before, I think both Mike and I were here in early 2016, there were 11,000 vehicles a day driving in that stretch of the roadway, which isn't surprising, and I'm certain it's higher than that today, so it does beg the issue of how do you keep people safe when you get that much traffic driving down that roadway.
And that is why the chief, when I met with the chief and we talked about this, he mentioned the rumble strips as a potential, and again, mostly on both sides of Dean as the halfway point sort of, and also the area where you got the most young kids potentially crossing the street. So, I mean, I know it's it always amazes me though when a state says something, you can't do this because this is this. Even if we're talking about safety and people's lives, I mean, your regulations are your regulations, but people's lives are a heck of a lot more important than your regulations. So, I mean, I would appreciate if we could look at potentially the rumble strips and, you know, and again, on both sides of Dean is what I would be looking for. I do think it would have some impact on slowing traffic. I mean, I've only been on the council for 2 months and I've gotten 3 or 4 calls on that issue alone. That's the major issue in that area. People are speeding, and then, you know, just the fact that I go by Dean and I see, you know, there's kids out there, there's kids getting picked up by their parents, and those cars are flying by there. They don't care about those yellow signs, so.
Well, and there's also the use of the fields there for Little League.
Yep.
And then there's a lot of there are kickball leagues that use the fields. And there can be a lot of people there even in the after-school hours who park their cars all along the side. People park in the Dean parking lot and then cross over. So there can be a lot of congestion there with, you know, young people who are using the fields as well, after school hours as well.
So what I'd like to do, and this is all right, and I'll make this motion if this is all right, Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion that the order has been complied with and that we would ask the superintendent and the engineer to try to see if we can do something like the rumble strips on both sides of Dean, and also if we could ask the chief of police, and also to try to put the school zone traffic lights as well, and then also to ask the chief of police if in the interim he could put some radar patrols there, as well as some of the traffic lines that tell you how fast you're going. If we,
Do you guys need that in a formal order, or do you want to just, you know, you can email Terry and myself, or do you want Terry to actually file another order that reflects the rumble strips?
I think for me, an email would be fine.
Yeah.
Keep it simple at this point. This actually brings up a good point that Mike and I have talked about, and actually relative to Metcalf and other locations. When we talked about it some time ago, we said that we thought there might be an opportunity to access some funding for some of the capital purchases that through the signal project that the council had approved last year. That's underway right now. We're buying equipment. We're getting ready to install some of that equipment.
Right. This is the 11 signalized intersections where we're replacing equipment. And I don't want to step on Bob's toes, but the thought is that there might be some funds left over in that bond when we're done with these 11 intersections. And that it would, that would be a place where we could purchase the school flashing signs, or even the permanent radar speed detection signs throughout the city. It's, you know, those signs, the school signs, they were about $4,000 each. A radar sign is about $5,000 each. So while it's not a lot of money, it adds up quickly.
Right.
And you know the condition of our budgets and,
Yep.
and all of that. So, while I'd love to return as much in that bond to the city and not spend it, that is an opportunity for the city to make other improvements outside those 11 locations. But we understand that if we were to do that, we would need to revise the approval of that bond. So.
Well, if it can help make the city safer, I certainly would go along with revising the bond. And I do think it's an investment in the safety of the neighborhoods and certainly in the safety of the kids, so. And in reality, in the safety of drivers.
But with all that, we've purchased equipment. We still haven't installed any of the signals yet, so I don't know where the final budget will be. But it looks like there might be a little bit of room for some small projects.
Yeah, I mean, if you keep us posted, I mean, I certainly, I would certainly be willing to help whatever it needs to do to get it through the council. And I would hope, and I think, both Dan and Gladys would help out as well, so, not speaking for either one of you.
All right, so the motion on the table, the order's been complied with?
Yep.
Just a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Right,
Just one last housekeeping. Can we just take up item 4 and have that tabled? Someone could file pass an amendment for that.
okay. Make a motion, we take up item 4
Table it.
and then have it tabled.
And item 4 is just from Councilor Lady, the building commissioner along with the Board of Health Commission come in front of the Public Safety Committee, to discuss the City Hall annex. None of them are here, so we're gonna table that. So are you gentlemen all set?
Yeah.
And so do you wanna
Unless,
take up 6 for?
I mean, the next one we're gonna do is the parks, so if you wanna just, I don't know if you want to stay, if you, but, so we're gonna order, we do, request that we take up item 6.
All in favor?
Aye.
Item 6. All right. The order is from Councilor Murphy, order that the Director of the Parks and Rec and a representative from the Police Department meet with the Public Safety to discuss past safety issues at the South Chestnut Street Park and a plan for a safer program for both neighborhood youngsters and Park Department employees. Also to discuss have their safety concerns at other playgrounds or parks. Want to start off there?
Yeah, I mean, and I've spent some time on the Parks Commission, to Terry's and Mike's chagrin.
Disdain.
Just chagrin, not disdain. I don't think, but, and I know we had problems, and I know they were, and, you know, I was at Lawrence School last week and just talking about some crime in that neighborhood, both at the park and then at Hampshire and Chestnut Street. And I know Terry expressed concerns to me last year about the safety not only of the children using the park, but also the safety of the people working the park. And so, and I did talk to the chief, and I just want to, for tonight, I would just like to hear, are there other areas, other parks where we're having problems? And then I would eventually like to table this and have the chief come in, or someone from the police department come in and let us know what's possible to make those safer. I did talk about community policing, and I know there's potentially a community development grant for community policing, which can help somewhat. I also talked about bike patrols and the potential of having a more personal, active police department in those areas. He did think both of those might be possible, but was not certain. So what I'd like to do is just hear from Terry, and then if there are other areas, then include those as we deal with this in the next meeting, if that's possible. Sure.
I would like to address this just a little bit. Yes, there are problems in other parks, some more serious than others. We can't solve all of the problems in the world. During the summer, we still have a program for activity leaders. Activity leaders are usually college-age, high school kids, few adults, who go to parks for 3 or 4 hours a day, and it's all drop-in. They play with kids, it's drop-in. There's no structure for who attends. So as the years are rolling by, last summer, South Chestnut Street had 2 shootings while our activity leaders were there. One was our first day. It's an 8-week program. It was July. There was shootings in the buildings next to the park. So that was just an earshot. But then within a few days, there was a shooting in the park. Before 12 o'clock in the afternoon, a man drove up, got out, had an argument with another man, and shot him in the arm. So our workers and the children witnessed the whole thing. So we left the park. We moved our program to Rowan, and the lunch program moved to Lawrence. So for last summer, we pretty much abandoned the park. That was certainly the most action that we've seen while we were there. A typical day certainly isn't like that. Most of the neighborhood parks, the kids know us, we know the kids, the parents. We don't have day-to-day troubles. I have noticed needles. Needles are all over the city. I think we found them in every park in the last 2 years, especially last summer. I don't have an answer for that. That's way more complicated than Parks and Rec can figure out, but that's a terrible safety risk for, again, the children, parents, the DPW workers. That's really my biggest concern. Since the shooting, we've been thinking about revising our drop-in program anyways because attendance is down. I think if parents in the neighborhood don't feel safe sending their child out to an unstructured program where they're not enrolled, then they're not going to come. So we're retooling our summer program to have more of a sign-up or a registration. We might move into schools a little bit more. We won't be in the park like every day of the week, but it'll be more structured, and I think it's safer for our workers and the children, and hopefully we can generate a little more parental involvement.
Okay, I like we're trying to do something as an alternative, but I guess I'm just a stubborn Irish, half French, half Irish man, but, I just don't want to let a small bad element of our city
No.
take away the quality and the investments that we made in playgrounds so that playgrounds become unsafe. And I know, and I did have one of my other calls was from a constituent not far from the park asking me to come because he had a bullet hole in his car window and a bullet that obviously ricocheted off his house, which was probably one of the times you had at Lawrence, you had I don't know what you call that, where you bring all the kids back in, their shelter.
Shelter in place, yeah.
Yeah, shelter in place. And so, I know there are concerns, and I think we got to work all this together. We got to get to the point where, obviously, we reduce crime, that would be great. But we got to be safe, but as much as possible, be safe and still be using our facilities to their full potential. And so that, kids should not have to ever see what they saw, obviously.
Exactly.
And we can't stop everything.
No.
But, we got to come to the point where we can feel relatively comfortable that I'm out there and my kids are going to be out there and we're going to be okay. They're going to be able to use that playground or any other playground in the city and feel safe. So, if I can ask Sergeant Hart, are you aware of these issues, Sergeant? Aware of what? The issues in terms of the parks and the... Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you just, you can come in too if you want, Sarge, whatever.
I'm drafting you for another issue today.
Yeah, I know, I'm here for that too. Yeah, we're well aware of all the problems with the parks and the needles and stuff. And like you had mentioned, coming up with this community development block grant, there's funds in there where we're gonna be doing walking beats specifically in those areas, in the parks down in South Holyoke, down on Chestnut, and bike patrols as well. So we just got a pedestrian and bike grant that we're going to be bringing forward to the city council. That's also going to help with those issues. So I think, I'm not sure if Tapestry has folks that go around during the weekends and stuff for the parks to police up those needles. I think that's an area that you can go to as well. Some other volunteer organizations I know, Ed Case with the Sheriff's Department, occasionally they have some volunteers doing the same thing down at Vega Park and Chestnut. So
Tapestry has always been wonderful, but I don't know that they have the resources to constantly police the parks. If they get a phone call, they pretty much go immediately and dispose of the needle. But I don't know that they have just people on regular patrols.
yeah, maybe we'll have to start some type of committee where we can get some volunteer organizations with your group, with them, and some other organizations here in the city that can go out on a regular basis, you know, once a month or whatever during the
No
summer.
daily.
But it does, based on what your knowledge of the situation with the potential of community policing and the walking patrols, plus the bike grant and bike patrols, and an emphasis on trying to make those parks in those neighborhoods, and obviously the whole neighborhood, but the parks in those neighborhoods safer. You know, I'm gonna just make the suggestion that maybe Terry and the chief, and if there would be anyone else that you think should be involved in that, you're the one that gets all these grants, so
Yeah.
you probably should be involved in it. But maybe if you could sit down and, you know, just kind of work out a plan where you feel comfortable. We know we're gonna have police patrolling these areas from 10 to 4. And they're not gonna be there every minute, but you know they're gonna be coming by more than once or twice a day. And you're gonna have a comfort level in that people are gonna see that there are police constantly coming by here. So hopefully that'll deter and make the staff.
I'm actually pretty comfortable with the amount of patrols that are in the streets and the parks. It's needles and it's trash, and
Okay.
there's actually a lot of gang activity. And in the last 2 years, homelessness has probably increased 500% in our parks. All parks, it's not just certain parks or wards. So
And-
patrols I
and-
am comfortable with.
Yeah, and maybe if we can sit down with some of the engineers and think up of some different plans, you know, through environmental design to make the parks a little safer. I know Chestnut Park, there's a lot of trees there that kind of are in the way of some of our cameras in that area. And there are also places, when it's nighttime, the lighting there, it isn't that well, so it's a place for them to congregate, so that's something to consider as well.
Now that you brought up the cameras, are they active again? Because that's an issue right there alone. We've had review about that, and I've been told that they were not active. So even with a camera, you know, I mean, it's not gonna prevent it right there and then, but I think the interactions of knowing that it's there, that if somebody's really monitoring, can see what's happening out in the park, but that has not been active, not even when that shooting took place, that one of the people got killed about 4 or 5 years ago. in that
Yeah,
park.
sometimes they're not left in a position that's favorable when something happens.
So, looking at any safety plan, I think we gotta start looking at those cameras because they have to be activated in order to be known that they're there.
So, I mean, I think, I just wanted to, you know, again, bring the issue, make sure that we're all working in together. If you all don't mind, I'm probably gonna try to coordinate a meeting with all of us at some time, at your all convenience. I'll come and just kind of go over it and just make sure that there is a plan that everybody's comfortable with, that and maybe we get someone from Tapestry to come, and maybe Eddie Case comes as well, and we try to make sure that we're dealing with all the issues and got a very smooth performance so that everybody's comfortable. You're comfortable having programs there. We're comfortable that we can provide the police protection. We're cleaning things up. You're comfortable cleaning up the potential, if there are things that are blocking views, that are making it more conducive to people causing trouble, then, you know, if we can do things along that line. So if it's okay with all of you, I am gonna informally try to get you all together and just talk about that. And Gladys, it's part, if you wanna sit down, I'll try to work it so that you also can make that. So I make a motion that the order has been complied with, and I thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, whatever one you want to take out,
Well,
1 or 12.
yeah,
That the last one?
yeah, why don't we go, if it's okay with you, we're gonna do one, are you here for both 1 and 12, or just 1? Just 1, so, and she's the only one here for 1, so why don't we do that, and then I'm gonna have the rest of you all just come in once we do this, okay? And we'll be Mike's over here, so I'd say item 1, we'll take it off the table.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Right, thank you. Item 1 is ordered by Councilor Murphy, ordered that the Public Safety Committee meet with representatives from the Police Department, the DA's office, the Law Department, Building Commissioner to determine if buildings owned by certain landlords have a history of greater tendency of criminal drug activity than others. If that is the case, to discuss what legal means are available to hold that landlord fully accountable and improve the quality of life for all residents.
And Crystal, we talked a little bit about what I'm trying to do, and unfortunately, we got several other people that couldn't make it, and I'm sorry that you ended up coming, and, but I know we talked a little bit last night, and, you know, and again, when I first got back on, I talked to a lot of people. I went and saw the chief, and we talked about some of the problems, and, you know, he definitely gave me an indication that, some landlords are much more consistent in terms of having gang activity, drug activity in their apartment buildings. And so, I mean, my thought, if we've got landlords that are profiting by allowing illegal activity, that is ruining. And then I've had at least two or three of my residents that live in apartment buildings that have told me they leave to go to work or go to school. They come back, they lock their door, and they don't come out again until they have to leave to go out to school. And nobody should be living like that. And so if a landlord is allowing that kind of activity, I just want to know what our maximum capacity is legally right now, and if that is not sufficient, to see if there's some potential that maybe we can go beyond that and get the state legislature to do something to help us. So that's my gist of my argument.
So I had Curtis Wyman, he's actually from our planning department. I had him do a case study on a property that's pretty well-known for some activity. I don't know if you got the email, he did kind of a data analysis of 173 Elm Street. And I can have him, you know, provide some of his data he found. It's pretty quick.
Yes.
Hi.
If you, okay,
I'll go over there so you don't have to hold.
yeah, come out in here. You come out in here and sit down.
Stand here. It seems to be established as the norm. Chris Newman, Julio, Planning Department, 91.
Is it on?
I'm loud.
It won't pick up.
All right, so should I go over to that one?
So you can just turn the button on the mic.
There you go.
There you go.
All right. So I was asked to look into 173 Elm as being an example of a property that has kind of what we colloquially know as greater than average rates of police calls relating to various things, whether it's drug use or other crimes or basic nuisance crimes, which is usually what I'm looking into as a planning department person for indications of blight. I took all the police data for the calls from service that they publish on the monthly Holyoke Police Department website, and I geocoded all of those so we get a little point for each. And then I drew a brief little radius around each property in the entire city. And I compared the rate of police calls in that area for 173 Elm as compared to any property. Mm-hmm. And then to specifically compare it to multifamily housing. So I wanted to be able to say whether it had a higher base rate. So just like, hey, do we see more police calls here? But do we also see more police calls per square foot? So the rate is higher regardless of the size of the property. And then to me, the most important one, which is, do you see a greater rate per apartment? I mean, it's no surprise that a multifamily housing unit would have a large number of police calls simply because there's a large number of people who live there. You're going to have more calls where there are more people. In each of these analyses, 173 Elm had more calls than you would expect for the average that's established throughout the area. We've got the police calls per square foot. It's got 10 times the ones that you'd get for the average property, and just more than 5 times the amount that the average multifamily residence gets. And these are multifamily residents with 8 or more units in them. So we're selecting out we're looking at large multifamily residences for that. Again, the average just calls in general. So the average for the 7,000 parcels I was looking at east of 91 was 5.5. And in the 6 months I was looking at for 173 Elm, we had 79. So that would be, again, by a factor of more than 10 times. And then for those multifamily units, you have 22. And then finally, the calls per apartment. The average multifamily apartment had in that same period just under 1, so 8.296. And Elm Street had 1.975. So I think that all the numbers that look more dire are exacerbated mostly just by the fact that there's a lot of people living in one place and they're going to call the police. But when you look at it as compared to other multifamily residences, even other large multifamily residences, it has more calls per apartment than the other large apartment buildings that make up a lot of the housing stock of our city. So, and that's again by a factor of just more than double. So it has 2.5 times more calls than the average multifamily residence in the city.
And so, I guess to take that to the next step, if in fact that landlord had other properties, and we found out that, all right, we're getting that many more calls at this property, and he or she or they have these other properties, and they're also having a significant number more calls. What tools can we have to try to get that landlord to correct the problems, to allow us to better enforce the law, and to make their apartments truly a legal entity throughout? So, I mean, that's really what my hope is, that there's something we can do. And I know, again, when I met with the chief, he expressed real frustration with certain properties. He didn't tell me any names, and that's why I asked. And I wasn't gonna ask for any names, but I was just looking, if there's a trend, what does the law allow us to do to correct it?
So I think that answer would come from me. Curtis did this as a courtesy to me because you wanted kind of a case study.
Yep.
So that just shows one
Thank you, Curtis.
property. And basically what we can do, Chapter 139 of the Mass General Laws is a nuisance statute. So you can force landlords to evict tenants based on that statute and that they're creating a nuisance. Usually it's for drug activity. And it was done at one point in the city where letters were being sent out from the police department to landlords. If something came in and someone provided an address, we would reach out to that landlord saying, listen, this person was arrested, they provided your address, you now have X amount of days to look towards eviction based on this statute. And I don't know where it fell away from doing that. I think as we got more involved with code enforcement, I think some of that issue sort of sorted itself out, but it's certainly something we can bring back. And ultimately what happens with that statute is if they don't go through the eviction process further down the road, we can actually ask that the building be shut down as one of the many avenues. They can also be fined a certain amount. They can look at jail time for not, remedying the situation. There's all sorts of different tools depending on what the court decides when the time comes. So we can certainly look at doing those things again. There's some creative ordinances throughout other municipalities that have looked into possibly getting reimbursed for police presence. Based on a certain number of calls that they receive. If you receive X amount of calls in a certain amount of months, we can then force you to have police presence and you have to reimburse the city for that because you're now becoming more of a problem than, say, an average property. We'd have to obviously look at the legal enforceability of all of that. Just because other municipalities have it on the books doesn't necessarily mean that it's up and running and it's, a viable avenue that they've utilized. So we have a couple of options. And we can kind of, test run a few things and bring back some old things and see what we can do. I do know that for the most part, code enforcement seems to sort of be leveling out some of these issues, but there are certain areas that I think no amount of code enforcement is going to fix, and we really need to kind of get more strategic. I have been in touch with Chief Ebo, and he's on board if we can find something to do. They're on board to support us any way they can. Certainly, first and foremost, we want to reach out to our police department if there's issues.
Yep.
Code enforcement can only do so much. These letters will only do so much, and it's just kind of an all hands on deck when we come up with these issues. And I would encourage the counselors, as you find areas or properties, to reach out, and we can go from there.
So, if I heard that correctly, then so if I know of a couple of properties that I've had significant comment on, I should be letting you know about that. Then you would work with the police to send an eviction, or who would send the eviction notice? You guys? Or?
We don't send the eviction notices, that's landlords.
Oh, okay.
We would send a notice of this activity. We'd have to obviously look into whatever you're sending us. And I can certainly, we can run an analysis and see really what the issues are there. But certainly if you have properties or areas that you want us to look into, send it my way and
Okay.
we'll bring it up.
Gladys?
Yeah, I know some time ago, it's been a while, I gotta say, that when I used to work at Nueva Esperanza, we would get the listing of anybody who's been arrested for illegal activity within the apartments that we would rent. And we would get like a note, like a listing of that, and that's how we would go back to the tenants or whatnot to follow and put pressure that if this is happening in your apartment, we're gonna evict you or whatever. for the procedures, but, when he was mentioning how these studies and researches are done, this is one of my concerns, that right now, it is why some people either don't dare to call. An example of this particular recent drug bust that took place on that same street, and the number you mentioned, they mentioned that the tenants have been calling, and this is a resistance, this is an issue that we're facing of people daring to call because you're gonna be pointed out. And it's more of a retaliation concern, in particular that building that you're addressing as a research. And I'm familiar with it. So it's also, we're not gonna see then a lot of people calling from the same building, because they're gonna know I'm gonna be pointed out. Somebody's gonna figure me out. And we want people to do that instead of not wanting to do it. So, as we're planning and considering this, I think people need to feel free and better, ways to inform, because the police cannot do it alone, but if people can start helping, it'll help the situation. That's all I'm worried about. Thank you.
So with those staggering statistics, it seems to me that we could file a legal case in housing court to document this and put it at the feet of a judge and say, get in some sort, that's Lucian's property, isn't it?
I don't have the name. Like I said, I just picked a,
Yeah.
I remember when he first came he came from New Bedford, and he bought Rob McLaren's property, which is 173, and he bought those big battleships up off of Walnut Street, down the corner of Walnut Street. He was like created something, like plastic something or other. And for whatever, he spent like $4 million and bought all this property. Never was a landlord before in his life. Got in way over his head. Mike Sullivan was the mayor at the time, and I remember meeting him. And I think, and John might be able to speak to this, but they were having shootout. I mean, you ever been inside that building? It's like the porches are inside, and they go around, and it goes straight up like this. I mean, we used to inspect that building. It was crazy back then. I mean, it just seems like we could go and say, listen, Lucian, you've got a month to straighten out this problem. If we get 10 more police calls from there, we're gonna ask the courts to appoint a receiver to get rid of all the drug dealers and all. I think even the front door glasses used to be bulletproof because they used to just shoot them out all the time. So, I mean, I think with that, we should just file a court case against this guy with the information that Curtis presented us. And I think that would be the first building. The eviction process, as what better than anyone, is that's a hard, all of a sudden they got 3 kids and, this was a mistake. And does the criminal case have to be adjudicated first before we can, because, I mean, if he has a criminal defense attorney, he might deter that housing court case. So the letters from the police department are very probably well-intended, but the process of eviction is impossible. And the housing court judges sometimes are not as, landlord-friendly and city-friendly as they could be. But I just think that if you go to court with just that information alone, it'd be like 10 times more calls than buildings of its same size. That seems like, I'd be like, get a receiver on this guy and get Lucian out of here. But that's just my opinion. But if you want to know about a building, I would like to see 173. Somebody file some court case, get all the police records, get all the arrests, and just say, like, listen, this guy is a slum landlord by all definitions of it. He doesn't care. Drug dealers are paying him cash. It's a win-win for him. I mean, so people are getting arrested in his building. Big deal. They're paying him an extra $3,000 a month to keep his mouth shut because they're selling so much drugs out of the place. I mean, that place it was a rodeo back then, and I'm sure it probably still is. So, if you could go back to 173 Elm with some of that and maybe file a court case against Lucian, we would appreciate it.
Yeah, based on the evidence, I'm fully endorsing that. I mean, and that's exactly, if whatever we can do, if we have that kind of landlord, I mean, and I don't know this, but it would seem like obviously they must be getting something out of it, and I won't embellish what Councilor President has said, but I mean, again, if we can work and move them out and get a receiver in there that's going to do a good job with the property, and it's going to allow the residents that are not part of gangs to be able to live a comfortable, peaceful life without fear, that would be a home run.
I mean, the other strategy you have to look at there is that these properties are large. And so you're looking for a receiver that's gonna have a lot of money. And then you're also looking for, like I said, we generally put receivers in for code enforcement. And if there's, generally you can find code issues. But like you said, you get a landlord that goes and fixes them, and now you're kind of running up against this, well, yes, there's illegal activity, your police department should be involved. So it's a strategy that, we're certainly looking towards, but the larger properties are definitely more difficult because you have to find somebody with the financial means to be able to do this. But we're trying to pluck away as fast as we can on all different properties, but, at some point we do run out of resources, and then it looks to, ultimate end game, does the city want this property? We get in there, we take it for whatever we can find. And so we always kind of have to play this game of, what is the best outcome for this property? Obviously, you don't want the criminal activity there, but how do we get there? So, like I did in the receivership update, we try and hit everything from single family, 2 family, 8 units, 43 units, so it's finding our resources and finding the method to get there as fast as possible. So it's certainly on our list, and we're working as fast as we can.
One last request, and first time I'm meeting you, I'm already trying to put you into extra work. But I'm just wondering if it's possible to do a similar type of research, but maybe do it on, and I'm looking at my ward, just because that's what I'm gonna first work with, because I know I've got specific problems in my ward. Without giving you a specific property, I'm just wondering if you could look at some areas and maybe meet with, someone from the police department, either the police chief or someone else, to just get some properties that they have concerns about, and then just see what the statistics are on those. And if you could, and then if you could refer that back to me, I would appreciate that.
I'll wander up to the mic.
Yep.
I think I left it on. Yeah, I think that from my perspective in the planning department, I think the idea sounds completely. I'm completely amenable to it, of course. I would need to speak with, the other members of my department and determine whether how much would be involved with that. One of the big things that I would want to do before expanding this is, as Crystal says, this was kind of just like an ad hoc request that I was happy to give back on, and I think the report is accurate. But I think before it became a standardized practice that would lead to, decision making on a larger scale, I would want to make sure that it was standardized and make sure that the data with which I was working was extremely accurate. I think to that end, you make an excellent suggestion that I go to the police department to speak with them. I've worked with their records department before, and I'd be happy to do so again. Again, should this be something we want to go forward with? But yeah.
I mean, I certainly would like to, if we can. The more information we can get and know that there's certain areas that we really need to try to figure out a way to either get them to correct themselves or to get them out of here, I'm all for it. And so whatever you can do, I would appreciate it. And like I said, if you got Ward 2 and you got things there, I would certainly appreciate knowing what those significantly greater calls are in the buildings, and then I can work with Crystal and try to get some other action.
It's also something that I'm happy to keep you guys abreast of, because there's a lot of other data points we can kind of add. I've used police points because there are such a number of police calls that you can create kind of a stable universe of data. But for looking at blighted properties, we also looked at Board of Health, Fire Department, Building Department, letters of violation, all these other things to kind of generate an idea of which properties are more troubled than others for the problem property group that is an internal staff group. I'm, of course, happy to keep doing that work, and I'll keep the counselors abreast if anyone's interested.
Thank you very much.
Of course.
I just think, in final though, is that the hassle of having to go to housing court, getting the parking and all that, it could just send a message to Lucian that, we got a target on you, we're gonna be watching you, and if we can get a court order, from one of the judges that says you need to comply with this, I mean, it's a start. I mean, I understand the whole receivership. You must get those emails from Alan Hope. I mean, that guy, he's driving me crazy with all this receivership stuff that he keeps talking about, but maybe we don't do that right away, but maybe we just say, hey, Judge Fields, what do you suggest we do? These are all the arrests. These are what the arrests for. What would you do if, you lived in Holyoke in this area? and just maybe get a court order. And like I said, it's a hassle going to housing court. So what do you want to do with the order?
I make a motion that the order's been complied with to a great extent, and if we get additional information, we'll try to work again and coordinate. I know with Crystal, but also with the chief and building commissioner, and make sure that we're all on the same page. But, you know, I think just getting that information and getting that statistical analysis certainly shows that there are buildings and landlords that are that have a significant problem that causes the city's quality of life to go down. So, for right now, I just say it's to be complied with.
Is there a second?
Second that?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very
Crystal,
much.
thank you so much. Curtis, great work, appreciate it.
Yeah, that was good. It's unbelievable, huh? Jeez. Okay, item 12. Yeah.
This is what we're doing on 170.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. You're fine with that. So can we have you all come in? You
Motion to take items
so moved, Mr. Chairman?
Item 12 is an order filed by Councilor Murphy. Order that the Public Safety Committee or the Development GG&R Committee meet with representatives from the Women's Compañeros, Western Mass Elder Services, the Police Department, the DA's office, the Mayor's office, the School Department, staff from offices of Representative Vega and Senator Humberson to discuss the issue of domestic violence with the following goals. Seek money related to DV from the money the governor has added to combat continued violence in order to provide more direct one-on-one support services and guidance to victims. Seek ways to expand the number of confidential beds available to abuse victims. Currently, the demand unfortunately exceeds the supply of shelter. Seek legislators' assistance to secure more funding from the Department of Public Health. Working with the police department and the DA's office, seek ways to reduce the potential for continued repeat offenders. Develop and promote mentoring opportunities for teenagers, especially to reduce the potential of teen dating violence. Councilor Murphy.
Yeah. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. So first of all, thank you all for coming. And I was hoping we were going to get a few more. I was hoping maybe we get some of the state legislature, since part of that is getting some of their money. But I mean, a few things. And 39 years ago, when Women's Shelter Compañeros was just beginning, I was a young alderman leaving and being supportive of it. And then I came back and I met with the chief. And we talked about the drug problem, but we also talked about domestic violence being a major issue for the police department in terms of both calls and in terms of obviously sending 2 officers in all cases and trying to make sure you're separating the abused from the abuser. Then I went and I called Carmen and I went to Women's Shelter Compañeros and met with them, and we talked about first of all, that the capacity is consistently full, that we're sending victims to we have to send victims to hotels to try to provide a safe environment, which to me did not sound too safe. I mean, it's obviously safer than where they were, but it's not the best. And we talked about the potential need for funds and potentially maybe another shelter at some point down the line. And then I was with Dr. Reich at Lawrence School last week, and we talked about trying to deal with younger people and giving them an understanding and trying to give them a route to respect each other in terms of gender and no one has the right to abuse. But also when we were there, we were talking about the children in the school who come from abused homes and what does that do to their ability to learn in school. And, you know, and obviously, and interesting, I know when I met with the chief, he mentioned, and I think, Carmen, you might have mentioned this to me, that the average age was in the mid-30s to mid-40s, but it extends from teens and it goes all the way into the elderly. And so it's not an easy problem, obviously, but I would like to see us take a more active approach from the city, from our state legislatures, making sure we're getting the funding and trying to make sure that everything that we're doing is to the maximum positive effect to reduce violence, to make those people that are being abused understand that they are a valued person and that they have quality and respect that they deserve. And I know there's advocacy and counseling and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of issues. So that's my goal. I wanted to bring you all here and just to see what we can do. One thing I definitely want to do is make sure that Representative Vega and Senator Humison are aware that the monies that are available from the state, we should be out there fighting for those to help us provide greater counseling, to provide better shelters, to provide programs to help kids from abused families in schools, but also to make sure that we don't create an environment where kids become abusers. So that's my idealistic goal.
It's open up to anyone. Please feel free to jump right in.
Thank
Could
you.
say who your name though, real quick?
Absolutely. So my name is Carmen Nieves, Executive Director from Women's Shelter Compañeras. And thank you so much for having me here tonight. And thank you for our community partners for being here also. So I just want to, and then I'll pass it on and introduce yourselves in a little bit. I just wanted to talk a little bit. I thought the legislators were also going to be here, but I wanted to go on record that in the state budget, the majority of our line item is the DPH, and it's 4513-1130. And for FY20, we're going to see a little increase statewide. JaneDoe.org and Jane Doe Inc. are actually our lobbyists and that lobby to the legislators about our funding. So majority of our funding when we talk to the legislators would be in that. And tonight I gave the school department some good news that the governor found a little bit of money to be able to offer a healthy relationship grant program. I doubt that the city of Holyoke will see any of it, but we will try to get what we can from it. And there's also $1 million campaign coming from the governor's office for teen dating violence prevention. So those will be billboards, those will be a memo from EOPS or something about the awareness, and it's probably during health classes and that kind of thing for the issue on teen dating violence. So I just wanted to give the committee that update. So on the last line for prevention, there is something coming through the state. And I will let Dr. Z talk about our collaboration a little too, but we are also addressing the prevention and the services that we provide for adolescents. And I will turn it over to Roseanne and Sergeant Hart, where we're hoping that we can go on record to talk about our call program for elder residents of Holyoke, 50 and over, that are experienced in domestic violence or know someone who has.
Go ahead.
Press the button. There you go.
There we go, we're on. Thank you for having us tonight, and West Mass Elder Care is happy to be a partner in this work, and I think that all of us working together will probably, one, build awareness, and two, build more sustainable ways that we can work together. I think for...
Just introduce yourself.
Sure. Roseanne Martosi, Executive Director, West Mass Elder Care. Sorry about that. You know, as we've... Sergeant Hart will speak more to the grant because I think that's what sort of coalesced and brought us together. We are happy to have that Department of Justice grant, and we're one of 9 grantees in the country. So that's quite, I think, quite an honor for the city of Holyoke, and really to be in that building of a sustainable call team. And he can, you know, address that further. I'll just sort of segue into working with older people. I think that this is something, you know, when you talked about the average age, that average age is probably up there and probably more silent in its representation in terms of people coming forward. Elders live within family systems. Many older people are raising their grandchildren. Usually when that happens, it's not because of a good reason. It's not a circumstance that they anticipated, you know, in the family unit, whatever the reason was, drug issues, substance use, incarceration, domestic issues. So it's all related. And I think what we're really hoping to do is build these relationships and be able to work more together. And right now we're in the first stage of this 3-year grant with a survey document. So we'll be surveying people and really collecting the information, because I don't even think that the statistics are really available to us at this point in time. So I think working, with across the lifespan will bring to the fore what's happening with domestic violence. And I think the other trigger for older people is that many people have long-standing, I'll just say dysfunctional or not working well relationships. And then as they age and health becomes more in the front, or cognitive issues become more in the forefront, then things can also come up that weren't perhaps as triggered in earlier life points. So I will just leave it there for this moment.
Okay, so as far as the police department is concerned, we recognize that there is a problem with domestic violence, and it is across the lifespan, like Roseanne said. We came across this elderly grant that addressed that, that we applied for, and it does pay for part of a elder affairs officer who'll be working on that. Mainly, this is a teaching and an outreach grant that we're going to be going out to the service providers and the elderly, and in this case, the elderly, for the purposes of this grant, are age 50 and above. So it's a little different than our statutes here in Mass. So that's our age group that we'll be addressing. As far as the teens and adolescents, we have other programs and grants that we're involved with, like the Shannon and the SSYI programs. We have the Boys and Girls Club who work with the youth, with the teen violence. We also have, in the SSYI, we have our partners with ROCA, who also have a curriculum designed around combating domestic violence. And those are pretty much it. We don't have a dedicated domestic violence officer like we used to have. Due to budget reasons, we kind of consolidate roles for our detectives. But that's one area that we're looking for additional grants through domestic violence to try and get a funded officer, like we have a partially funded officer for the elderly, so.
Can I just ask a question on that before I go to Dr. Dryken? So at one time, we did have an officer who oversaw any domestic violence issues in the city. Obviously, they didn't go to every single event, but they were the person that was kind of like the expert in the police department.
Correct.
Yeah, and so you are seeking, is that federal money that you're after? Or?
Any money will take.
Well, I knew that, sir.
And statistically, if there was a police officer, we know data shows that the homicide rate for domestic violence drops drastically. So when there is an officer working with victim services, it helps in the lethality. So we are, whatever we can do to help, to have a domestic violence officer in the police department, we would want to do that.
Could you forward those statistics to me?
Absolutely. They're from the Department of Justice.
Gladys, go ahead.
I recall when it used to be available, but what, more or less, how much does it cost? So do they have to be part of the union, or this is an independent?
What's it?
The officer you had before?
A domestic violence officer.
Oh, that was just a regular Ramona, remember?
Ramona, right.
Yeah, she used to be our domestic violence officer.
Right, can you roughly, what we're talking money-wise, what are we talking, or something like that?
Well, that's just,
Someone like that.
that's just another officer. I think at that time, we were probably at around 98 officers, between, I'd say 95 and 98 officers. Now, we're at 90 officers. So we used to have, well, we brought back the code enforcement officer, Officer Lopez, and because of the grant, the elderly officer. But at one time, we had 3 or 4 community policing officers, a domestic violence officer, code enforcement officer. So because of budget reasons and our manpower went down, so kind of all those roles are consolidated into other detectives who are doing multiple jobs now.
Okay, thank you. And I'm gonna come back, but Dr. Drake?
Yeah, so I brought with me Sandy Dona, who's our new Director of Student Support. She may be new to the Holyoke Public Schools, but not new to the city of Holyoke. And, you know, in her role, she does coordinate all the mental health and counseling services across the district. And so when we think of domestic violence, as has been mentioned here, you know, it runs the gamut because we see it with our children who witness it at home or in the community, in the neighborhood, and that clearly, I don't have to, I think, share the impact that that would have on our young people in the schools. And then we also have cases of it amongst our students, you know, the dating violence, you know, and that's, there's been an uptick of that really throughout the country, and something that we are concerned about with, you know, having healthy relationships amongst young people. We've had a relationship with Compañeros over the years. They've worked at Dean, at Holyoke High through a Stop the Violence, through the it was a grant for athletes.
Attorney General's office, through the
Attorney General's office. And our counseling team has worked closely with them over the years. Just recently, and I'll let Sandy talk a little bit about this, we applied for a grant that came available to work, again, with them at the high school level, which is where you would see, you know, the, you know, higher incidence of issues with dating violence. So Sandy can talk a little bit about the grant. You know, we're keeping our fingers crossed that we'll receive some of this funding.
One of the things I think that was most striking, though, before I talk about the grant, when talking to the counselors, when I kind of asked for some data, and they resoundingly said that the instances of students witnessing domestic violence in their homes are extremely high. However, they're so complacent about it, as if it's an everyday occurrence, and so it's not something that they go to the counselor and say, oh my gosh, there was some violence at my home last night. It's just oh yeah, that's just the way of life kind of thing. And so I think it's even more important that when working with Compañeros to write this grant, it's not a large grant, but really the focus of the grant is on professional development for not only just staff, but for the students themselves. And then the third component is going to be in terms of getting a tighter referral system in place along with interventions.
Correct, right. And I think another important piece is the bystander effect. So especially in the schools and mostly with adolescents, they tell each other the disclosure before it even goes to an adult. So I appreciate that thought is being put in, giving the support, the information, the vocabulary for the adolescents themselves. They're already trying to work it out. It's not healthy. So if we give them the tools to try to do that, it goes much farther for the intervention part. I mean, for the prevention.
And I'd like to add that the police department also has a grant through Department of Mental Health, where we have a crisis intervention team that goes out 4 times a week, Monday through Thursday, with a clinician, and a lot of it is responding to some crisis calls that happen in the schools or happen at home. We're doing the follow-ups, and with that team, as well as our elder team, we have another grant for opioids, but I put in a grant through the Community Development Block Grant to have a kind of a drop-off center or service center for all those types of problems, where our officers will be there, and it'll be right next to Woman Compañeros, and we're hoping.
That's that $25,000, right?
Right. Yep. We're hoping to get that. And kind of consolidate all the problems and staff and family members to go there, where we'll have all the professional services available and all the resources, so we can set these people up with the right services. And I think that they're all the domestic violence issue kind of is a isolated problem that encompasses a lot of the other problems that we're addressing, like the opioids, like mental health issues. So I think that all contributes, and I think having that all in one central location, trying to help individuals out, I think we can kind of find out what the real problem is, and we can fix that.
So you did say the crisis, when you have a police officer in a crisis, they come with a counselor. I heard that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, so.
Yeah, I
I
would just,
like that. Go ahead.
I think of note, I'm reading from the grant, that we applied for that, that in the last year, there's approximately 90, the women's shelter has supported at least 90 youth aged 14 to 22 who reported being in unhealthy relationships. I think that's a pretty high number in just a year's time, and those are just the ones that they know about.
And by the time it gets to women's shelter, it's
Yeah,
pretty
severe.
bad.
Right. And we see a high number in the schools too, that they may not always, so, I mean, that's just, I think it's more significant than what I think people are aware of. And it's clearly a societal issue that is something we need to address. And I appreciate you shedding light on that and the importance of this work. And I do think even though we talk about high school, even at a younger age, I think we can't ignore the need to look at middle school students as well, because some of those unhealthy habits start younger and younger in relationships, as especially with social media and media influences. I know how much you love social media, Terry.
Yeah, you know me. You saw my cell phone, right?
Yeah, right.
But
I flip phone.
Yeah.
Right, I'm sorry, Dr.
No, go ahead.
I think this grant, and we're appreciative also, will start us to get there. I mean, we're being asked to take the pulse of the community on these specific questions. It's a 4-page survey that we're asking anyone who lives in Holyoke that's 50 and older, men and women, we're going to try to reach, and professionals that work in Holyoke, we're going to also try to reach and to do these surveys. They're ongoing. We would love the assistance of all of you to try to sort of get as many as we can. We will then look at it and we will identify how to let the services do the talking from these surveys. And I think Sergeant Hart and I think Roseanne, we're looking forward to having these communications with the population. We're not just sending them out. Women's Shelter is dedicating 2 staff members to actually do the surveys one-on-one. So we may not get a lot, but they'll be very informative.
Yeah, we're looking to find we're doing a needs assessment to kind of direct our training, where our training is gonna be geared towards. Is it gonna be for financial exploitation? Is it gonna be for sexual abuse? So these surveys are very important to give us a picture of really what the citizens need here. And with that, we're also going to be developing a legal resource guide that we can distribute and hand out to our officers, because all our officers are going to be trained in this as well. So we'll have that legal resource guide, and that can be available to the folks too, and it'll have resources showing different organizations and what they can provide in that.
And this, beyond the training, the stakeholders, the community professionals will be brought together at some point, probably in year 2. So there'll be a trainer that comes from the technical assistance team here to Holyoke, and so it will be a building, and it's a 3-year process. So hopefully by the end of that, we will have made some headroads and have some sustainable teams and communication and referral process. I think that's a really important one, so that we're all working more closely together and know what each other's resources are, so we can have that reciprocity happening, so we can support people as they go along. I mean, just a fact of economic, financial stressors can also lead to these situations or contribute to them on an ongoing basis.
Right, and we don't, like I said, we don't have a officer dedicated to domestic violence in the city of Holyoke. We do not have an advisory board on the issue of teen dating violence in the city of Holyoke. We do not have a domestic violence task force in the city of Holyoke. The Hilltowns, Ware has one, Palmer has one. We are all our agencies are looking for money wherever we can. That's just another wish list, I guess, that I would have, but we really are not as a city. That's why this grant is also very important that it be successful, because it's a way for us to start having people come together on this issue. And we understand that it's 50 and older, but you know, that this is a way for us to start. So if we can build this, maybe we can find funding in other ways. But I am hoping that our state legislators will assist us with this.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly going to try to lobby those state legislators.
And like Carmen said, part of this grant is for us to establish a task force, which is what we're doing with the partners you see here, with the District Attorney's Office. We have Appleton Corporation, we have Holyoke Housing, and a lot of other organizations already in the mix and committed to being part of this task force.
And the DA has someone specifically that's a domestic violence lead, right?
Yes, well,
In Elder Affairs, the
yeah.
prosecutor's office.
Yes, and we're going to be going to Denver in a couple of weeks for our next training with 2 prosecutors.
So it'll be a train the trainers. We'll be trained on the curriculum on a national level for addressing elder abuse and the issue of domestic violence. And then the hope is that we come back and we'll be able to go to a professional development meeting for the teachers, that we'll be able to go to Holyoke, Health Center or Holyoke Hospital, to Western Mass Elder Care, to Women's Shelter, and we'll be able to train others on this issue. And a big part of that is the resources, what to do when someone discloses that they are either witnessing it or experiencing it.
So if I can just ask a few other, and make a few points, because Carmen, I remember, and I would like you to just throw a statistic out that shocked me when I heard it, but can you just give us the statistics? How much Women's Shelter, how many cases or how many times when Women's Shelter has been at the Holyoke District Court and advocated in the last year on someone?
So, all right, so these are purely Women's Shelter data. I pulled them out today. So as of January 1st, 2018 until March 6th, 2019, so a little over a year, we actually saw 1,097 Holyoke residents. So 576 of those were our hotline calls. 13 women and children were in our shelter that only came from Holyoke, which means they weren't homeless. So our shelter is not homeless. These are people who are fleeing domestic violence. So they had a home in Holyoke, and they're hiding in our shelter. 498 is the number that you're looking for. And this is just the city of Holyoke that we saw face-to-face, either in court or in our offices on Ray Street.
So that statistic just, and I'm doing this for, I know you're all aware of this, but I want the public that does watch these things to realize this is a major problem that we really need to address. And the other thing, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty strong that when a child sees domestic abuse and experiences that, not only do they have the psychological and social problems in their youth, but as they get older, they're much more likely than someone who is not in a domestic violence situation to become either an abuser or abused.
Just the perpetrating part of it, 3 times more likely to perpetrate abuse. It's a learned behavior. So they're learning it, it's being reinforced. I think that you talked a little bit about that, the complacent, so it's, it's a learned behavior reinforced, but it can be unlearned, and I think the zero tolerance that the city of Holyoke is attempting to do is very important. And again, Councilman Murphy, thank you for bringing it to the forefront, because a lot of families are suffering literally in silence. And again, if it has gotten to Women's Shelter, I mean, DCF might be involved, the neighbors might be involved. So if we're seeing it, I'm sure it's 3 times worse than it's happening in our community.
I mean, the broader subject or reasons for elder abuse, for every case, the national statistics are for every case that's reported, there's probably 3 more cases that are not. So I think that that's just sort of in line with DV, because it holds a lot, people hold these problems
Right.
in privacy for many reasons.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm sure there are some that are just, it's my own problem, it's my fault, and I know I've heard that before. Two other questions, I guess I would call them questions or problems. So one is, it appears based on what I've been told that the police might have to go to someone who is being abused 2, 3, 4 times prior to maybe them finally going to a shelter or to seek additional counseling. So how do we get to the point where that person recognizes in abuse 1 that that's not something they have to take? And I know that's a difficult thing, and I know when I met with the chief, he indicated that a lot of times you'll go and the person will say, yeah, they did this, but then 5 or 6 hours later, oh, no, he didn't mean it, or if it's a he. Also, most of the time, it's a he, unfortunately, for my gender. But, so is that a correct scenario?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that we kind of address in this grant,
Okay.
that we were hoping to try and address, not only address the victim, which is our main focus, but also address the suspect, because they have problems. Obviously, if they may have anger management issues, they may have mental health issues, but that person needs help if he's the attacker and he's fighting with his spouse or girlfriend. So that person is kind of left off to the side, where a lot of the focus is on the victim, which it should be,
Right.
but there should also be services for that suspect as well, so it doesn't happen again.
Okay, and then just to go back to the connection to the schools. So if a police come and get a call, and let's say there's been some abuse, and there are two kids in that household, and maybe you can't legally do this, I don't know, but I wonder if, when that's happening, if your officers then can report that we went to we went to 1 Main Street, and we know there was a 5 and a 7-year-old kid, and we're going to let the schools know that, because that kid may be going to school the next day or the next week or the next 2 weeks or whatever, and be feeling some kind of in need of some kind of support or counseling. And I don't know if that connection can be made, and if it can, is it?
Yeah, I think it can be made. There's some ways to go about kind of identifying calls like that, where they can be specifically identified and then referred to the school resource officers, as well as the school resource supervisor. So when they come on their shift, what they do is they read the call log from the time they left to the time they come on duty, and see if anything happened. And if certain calls are flagged, that they can look at those calls and kind of address it if something like that had happened.
I don't want to speak for the police department, but you all have a great standard operating procedure for what he just talked about. And besides calling DCF or reporting or that kind of a thing. But really, the city of Holyoke, they do a great job with trying to connect resources, reaching out somehow to the school. Sometimes the child is not there, so it then becomes whether the child was there, if the rest is going to be made. I mean, so they're part of their training in the city of Holyoke. They do a great job and try to sort all that out. And we would like to see the resources or the referrals made, and it's usually done through either DCF or it's done through someone at the police department. So I think that's already sort of in place to have that done. I think the fear for many survivors is having DCF come in. So now this person's getting arrested. Now my children might be taken away. I mean, so so we're always sort of careful, and we talk about in training how the police officers do that. So they have been doing a good job about that. I don't know if they're counting, if they're the statistic for that, but DCF would have that information for you of, what we're seeing. And of course, in the schools, the children will disclose, and it will come up in another way. They can't sleep, all of what Dr. Z talked about.
Right.
So it is being addressed. I am confident that the city of Holyoke is addressing it as best they can, and that the police department is addressing that also.
Yeah, I would say, this is hard to believe, my 4th year here, there's been much improved communication with the police and the schools on a lot of different matters. It's a credit to, we have a liaison that Sergeant Garcia, who oversees the school resource officers, and that's made all the difference in the world from when I first started to now to keep us informed of things that happen outside of school, and then, communicating with even issues in school. And it's, the relationships are now starting to be, forged between administrators and Joe and his team. And I do think we have 2 SROs now working in our schools who are very, I think very considerate of our kids and the needs, and handling these situations as with the sensitivity they deserve, right? I mean, these are really hard, complicated, charged issues, and they're delicate. And so I've seen an improvement. What's hard a lot of times, though, with DCF is we don't, if something's filed outside of school, even if there's a 51 filed against the school, I don't get any of those reports. I'm not, they're not allowed to share that information, which does make it hard, even if the issue is, an in-school issue. So we do rely on, the police, and then a lot of kids do disclose, and parents come in, and that's where the relationships and the trust is so important, because families that trust us, and that's why rebuilding trust is so important, because parents will come in and say, we need help, or, this is what's happening at home. And in a perfect world, that would happen for any child or parent that was having issues at home, that they could rely on the schools to be able to then make the connections to the community organizations.
Right, the Department of Child and Family Services, they do have a domestic violence liaison that works just for victims of domestic violence, and I can forward you her information. But mind you, there's only 3 in the state.
Go ahead. So, I'm so happy that there could be a task force being developed for this particular. We talk about attendance, and sometimes these are the children, so you'd be surprised that mom couldn't send them home brought them to school because of what happened there the night before. And they probably are bruised themselves, they don't want to be seen, they protect their children in a sense to not be removed, to be concerned about that. I've known the work that Women's Shelter Compañera have done for years, because I worked in this area for some time, and many years ago, and that was one of the issues. We held home-based information sessions in a house, and these women will come together and they shared, I'm being abused right now, but this is my concern right now. And we would work ways of bringing them out to try to move them out of the circumstance, but most of the time is the fear of the child being removed, and also they're protecting the kids where they may not send them to school, afraid of that, you know what I mean? So with the attendance issue that we're facing, this could be about, who knows, how many percentage of that.
It's definitely a part of it.
Could be some of it, and I'm glad that if there's a task force that can be developed in the community, I think it'll help also everything else that we're facing besides the trauma, that they'll also be, they're part of it.
Would anybody like to add anything else? I will offer this, if there is anything that the city council can do, and you need someone to I would gladly sponsor, or whatever the case might be. If you need lobbying or whatever, I want to make sure that we continue to make the progress that we're making. We're never going to eradicate it, but we should certainly have a tremendous opportunity to reduce it, to give kids a home that they can feel comfortable with, to give the elderly a place that they're safe and secure and honored and respected. So if there's anything that we can do to help, I think, we're here, we're paying attention. We appreciate what you've done so far, but with all due respect, it's not enough. We need to find a way to do more, and we need the community support to do more. And I certainly like the idea that we need to get back to a domestic violence police officer, just based on your comment in terms of victims that are I think you said, did you say terminated victims? What was the term you used?
What was that? I'm sorry.
What was you said, I know when we have.
Oh, the lethality. Yeah, so there's a model that we use to determine someone's lethality for survivors. And if they're connected to a domestic violence program, if they are connected to law enforcement, if they are trying to prosecute, or, that all these little check marks, and the lethality rate becomes lower if everyone's involved in helping keep this survivor safe.
And so, man, my last thing, and it goes to prosecution, and I know, again, I was shocked, and Carmen can tell you that I said I was shocked when the chief told me that until 4 years ago, strangling somebody was a misdemeanor, and
Yes, to the domestic violence law 2014, that changed, correct?
Yeah. So, and the last part, once someone is an abuser, and they're an acknowledged abuser, and we go to court, I guess my question is, what kind of legal punishment does an abuser get typically? Is there a typical, or is it something that doesn't get to court as often as it should?
It's one of those "it depends" questions.
Okay.
On? It depends on the severity of the abuse, on how many times he was abused, or he or she did the abuse. So there's a lot of different factors that are involved.
Okay.
Before a sentence is given, and before there's any type of plea bargains or probation or restraining order is issued. There's a lot of different factors.
There is a district attorney dedicated to domestic violence cases, which is a great improvement. And part of the training, part of the reports that the police officers do, part of, when I hear someone say that they've gone to a house 3 or 4 times, and then we asked, did they leave any resources? What happened? So for us, there's a huge piece missing, that accountability, and I think we're trying to address it in Holyoke. There's so many laws already in place, so it's more of a society thing. So, Mr. Murphy, I think we're working on it. I think we're all aware of it. I think that even the school department knows that it used to be mediation between these adolescents. That doesn't happen anymore. There's more safety planning for teen victims, as also for adults. But to hold these offenders accountable, that's a whole other. We're just starting to see that with male survivors, with female offenders, with the issue of domestic violence. I think we're not there yet. We are, nationally, we're almost there. We're trying to hold someone accountable.
Okay, thank you. I'm all set.
Thank you. I just wanna say before we wrap it up, you brought a point, because we're talking about how these children are saying that, and I know, I was a woman, of course, I'm gonna advocate for my women, but there's also children's males who are growing up watching this, being seeing the perpetrator who is the abuser to the partner, whoever, and then they kind of think that this is okay. And, to be real, how much of that education are we doing right now? We don't get into that type of education. We really focus on the young ladies and letting them know the do's and don'ts. When you see these signs, this is because it's going to become a relationship who's going to control you. Eventually it's going to get to abuse. But I don't see much being also talked to the males, you know what I mean? Talking to them about what you've seen in your life is not right, you know, what's happening. When you look at the numbers of some of the young people being part of the Shannon Grant and SSYI, in the, you know, I've seen this in the conversation you had with the kids, is that, you know, I just wanna get out of my house, this is happening in my house, I don't wanna be part of it. And it's like, it becomes like a norm to them, because nobody's educating them about, do you wanna do the same thing that you've seen in your father or in your, you know, stepfather, whoever may be the role there. So there's not much done about.
Well, I do think Eddie Case does a fair amount of that with his his basketball league with the students. I think Eddie and I have talked about that. But I don't think enough, you're right, Gladys, I think more needs to be done. We are introducing a new health curriculum next year called the Great Body Shop that has, you know, for every grade, that does have healthy relationships as a part of it. But and then, you know, there are mentoring. We're working with the Boys and Girls Club on a mentoring partnership. Kelly School is, and a lot of the mentoring is for young, you know, males, middle school males, and I think those are opportunities to stress just that, because there's some poor modeling that they've seen, and I think still society glorifies violence too, still. And those are some of the messages our kids get. But I think Eddie does a lot of that in his work with a lot of the young males he works with who attend our schools.
Yeah, they have a, in his basketball leagues, they have over 240 youth. And part of that basketball program, they have an educational curriculum.
That's right.
Where they would address and have classes before games or after games that the players would have to attend and be part of in order to play. So it's a great program. I just wanted to add one more thing. We got an amendment to our SSYI grant, which is focused on the high-risk males, 17 to 24. The state's now looking at females, high risk. So we got an amendment. We're looking to generate a list for ROCA to go out and kind of get those women as well.
If I could just throw one more, I'm trying to shut up, but I just can't.
Sure.
And it kind of goes exactly with we're talking about. But I know when I coached at Hoyok Community College and I coached the baseball team and I would do youth clinics, and I'm just wondering if you can work with the high school athletes, both male and female, and others, but have them go to the younger grades. I mean, I would have kids from 7 or 8 years old to about 12 or 13, and my college guys working with them and just kind of talking about, you know, what are you doing in school? Well, you know, and I got to this college, I got a chance to play baseball here, or I got a chance to do this because I was doing this, and also showing the respect and all those kind of things. I mean, and especially in the male aspect, probably more than the female aspect, but if something like that could be, you know, you give the high school basketball team or high school football team or baseball, whatever, at Hoyok High, and you say, we're gonna get you community points, or whatever you call them, if you were, you know, you're gonna go to Kelly School, and we're gonna just talk to the kids, or do a clinic in the gym, and just get those kids to interact and find out, you know, what, even though that's someone I look up to, they're still going to school every day. They're studying every day. They're showing a respect for people. I mean, those are lessons, and I can tell you, I still have kids that, and I did my things like 10 or 12 years ago now, but I still have some kids that I've seen now that tell me that those were times where they really, you know, and my players found out, boy, you could have a tremendous influence on these young kids if you do it right.
We just lost that grant. That was the Game Change grant that we had with the Holyoke. That exactly what you just said. And it was $20,000 that Women's Shelter Compañeras got, that we provided assistance to the health teachers, to the coaches. And I have to say this publicly, it was a $20,000 grant that we got from Robert Kraft to
That's right.
to combat, to have the coaches take up the mentoring, to give exactly what you just said. So we still have that information, and we'll try to recycle it somehow. I'll pass it along to see if we can find another grant for exactly what you just
I'll
said.
even say, even if there's not money, I mean, I would venture that if you said to high school athletes, you got a chance to have an influence, and we're gonna let you go do this for 2 hours or 3 hours, whatever the case might be, and, you know, and you can, different sports, different things, and you just go to that school, you go to that gym, maybe you work with 2 or 3, a small class, or maybe you work with a whole group. I would tell you, smaller groups tended to work better. And I was in a position where I could put one of my players with 5 or 6 kids at a time, and for like half hour, that's who they worked with. And then they went to the next guy, and they got to know 10 or 12 athletes, 10 or 12 of my student athletes, and we always emphasize student athletes. And we always emphasize good person, good student, then a good athlete. But, you know, and I would venture that you would get athletes that would be interested, or other, you know, hey, they're the best singer or the best actor, and get them to show, you know, this is what you have to do. But it's also got to be the mentoring thing, and I know when we first talked, that's another thing, that if we can do something like that without having to spend a lot of money, it would also help, to me, it also helps the prestige and the image and the self-respect of the high school person going down and showing the middle school students, or going down and showing the elementary school students, you know, hey, I had an influence on their life. I can do things. I can be a significant influence on making this a better world. And so, I mean, again, you know, I'm old, I still have high ideals, but, you know, if we can do any of those kind of things, and again, I thank you for your time. I thank Chairman Bresnahan and Gladys for coming, and, you know, I think this is an important issue, and again, if there's anything that I can do, please feel free to contact me, and if you're having good results, let me know those. If you're having bad results and you need something, let me know that, and I'll do whatever I can. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you for your support.
You're welcome. And
We're adjourning, or we got?
I'll make a motion that the order has been complied with.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, Dan. I
Make a
appreciate it.
motion, adjourn?
Adjourn, yes. Second?
Thank you
Aye.
both.
Yeah, thank you, thank you.